Sometime around 1987-88, I was in the third grade. And my older brother came home one weekend from being at a friend's house, and he told me all about this game he had played, where he got to pretend to be a warrior with his two-handed sword, and he used dice to fight monsters. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard of. Well, the very next time he got to go to this particular friend's house and play this game, he invited me to come along. And that day was the first day that I saw this box. And in that box was not a board game, was nothing but these two books and this set of funky dice. And that was my introduction to Dungeons and Dragons. I spent that entire first day playing this thing called a cleric, who was a warrior who couldn't use bladed weapons but who had magic and could heal the other players. Also known as the character that no kid wants to play and is really easily fobbed off on a younger brother. Well, after that, I was hooked. Within a few weeks, I was using words like saving throw and hit points and armor class, stuff that I'd never even heard of before I started playing D&D. And I ditched the cleric and was able to be a dwarf with a battle axe and a horned helmet, something way cooler that I actually loved being. And my brother and I soon got our own box set with our own books and our own funky dice, and we started running games of our own. Well, within a year of that first game, we moved to the UK, where arguably gaming was even more popular than it was in the States. Right around this time, there started to be a news story that circulated about a young man, a troubled young man, who ended up murdering his stepfather. And Dungeons and Dragons was cited as a motivator. Now, this wasn't the first time that the game had gotten this type of controversy and negative press, and it wouldn't be the last. But it did cause kind of a stir, and this was in the pre-internet generation. You know, news didn't circulate quite as quickly, so it took a while to get around, but eventually even my parents heard about it in the United Kingdom. Now, my folks were responsible parents and good parents, but they also weren't terribly reactionary. So there was a compromise made. They didn't say we couldn't play D&D anymore, but what they did mandate was that we couldn't play Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, which was the most popular version of the game now going on at this point. This ended up being kind of a double-edged sword, really a blessing in disguise, because like a lot of gamers and a lot of kids, we enjoyed role-playing, we loved D&D, but we wanted to expand our game, and we couldn't do that because we had been limited by our parents' rules. So we started exploring other games, and suddenly the whole world of role-playing games opened up. It wasn't just Dungeons and Dragons. There was Middle-earth role-playing. Yes, Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, Tolkien, huge. We bought this at Hamley's in London and discovered an entire section of role-playing games. Next thing you know, everything a kid could want, everything you could dream of had its own role-playing game. Star Wars? Yup. Marvel superheroes? Done. Ninja Turtles? Califrickin' bunga. There was every game under the sun, and we started playing them and enjoying them, and I was inundated in this life of role-playing games. "20 years after that first game in 1987, I was still role-playing. I was still running games for my friends. Only now I was doing it in a world that I had created. And my friends began encouraging me to take that world and write it down. 5 years later, I published The Exiled Heir. I would say that 99% of most fantasy writers have gamed or are still role players. It is this common bond that we share, and it fuels what we do. In fact, my older brother, the very one who introduced me to gaming in the first place, his character at the gaming table was the complete inspiration for Coltrane in The Exiled Heir. He had been watching a lot of Rocky, and he thought, wouldn't it be cool if I played a Forge-born boxer? And that's how Coltrane was basically born, and that continues to happen. There's several characters in the forthcoming Errantry of Bantam Flynn were inspired by friends of mine at the gaming table. Now today, role-playing games may or may not be as popular as they were, say, back in the 80s. There's certainly a lot more technology now to distract not only kids, but us adults too. That being said, there are still a ton of us out there who enjoy sitting down at the tabletop with our friends and rolling some dice and telling a story and having a good collaborative and creative time. And what's started this whole blog for me really today was that just yesterday, D&D released this, which is very similar, look familiar, to this. So this is the 5th edition of the game according to their numbers. I actually think there have been a few more editions than that, but they're calling it the 5th edition. And it just hit the shelves yesterday. They're calling it the starter set, and it really is just that. It is a place for people to jump on board with gaming. It is very easy to understand, very rules-light introduction to role-playing games. Us old school gamers, we have a tendency to be a little cynical and maybe a little critical, and we like to argue about things that most people wouldn't even care about, you know, which system is better than another or which one do we enjoy playing than another. But I've decided that I wanted to be a little less cynical and just ride the fervor and be excited about the fact that there is a new rule set out there. And the reason for that is because Dungeons & Dragons still remains the only household name left in gaming, and it's always been that way. If you tell somebody one of your hobbies is role-playing games, once you're old and mature enough not to want to hide that fact like you did in high school, you don't ever say, I play role-playing games, and if they look at you and they don't understand, you don't ever say, oh, have you ever heard of Pathfinder, or have you ever heard of GURPS? No one is ever going to have heard of that who's not played a role-playing game before. The go-to example is always Dungeons & Dragons. This was and is the gateway into role-playing games for most people. It is still the flagship that if it wasn't on the shelves and if it wasn't out there, it would wither the rest of the industry as far as I'm concerned. And so I'm really excited that it's out. I'm trying to contain that childlike sense of wonder that's back. I mean, is it new and shiny? Yes. But it's also a chance for those of you out there who've never gamed before. Maybe you've heard of it and always wanted to try but never had the chance. Or maybe you've never heard of it and you happen to get through this nerd blog of mine and got a little intrigued. But I strongly encourage you to go out there and spend $20 and buy the box set and read through it and maybe get a group of people together and throw some dice and have some fun. So while you do that, I'm going to go ahead and delve into this new edition here and get started. Oh look, it still comes with funky dice and I'm going to have a good time. So anyway, y'all have a great one and I'll see you back here next time. Bugbear.